It was a quiet morning in a small town, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The soft hum of the air was broken only by the occasional chirp of birds and the distant rumble of motorcycles. In the heart of the town stood a small, humble house with a faded American flag hanging on the porch. Inside, 90-year-old Edith Harper sat in her armchair, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses to read the paper. The lines on her face told stories of a lifetime lived with purpose and courage, having served her country decades ago during World War II. But that morning her courage would be tested in a way she never expected. As Edith glanced out the window, she saw them, a group of bikers, their engines roaring as they sped past her house. The noise was deafening, and it wasn't long before they stopped right in front of her property. She had lived in this town for over 60 years, and had seen many faces, but today, the sight of these men brought a sharp sense of unease. They were loud, intimidating, and as their boots hit the pavement, she felt her heart skip a beat. One of the bikers, a burly man with a face covered in tattoos, stepped forward and walked towards her porch. Edith's eyes narrowed slightly, instinctively reaching for her cane. She had fought in a different battle once, but this moment felt just as dangerous. The biker sneered at her, clearly noticing her military jacket hanging in the hallway through the window. He leaned against the porch railing, mocking her with a smirk. "Old lady, what's it like to be stuck in the past? You think anyone cares about what you did back then?" He scoffed, his voice thick with disdain. Edith's heart sank, but her pride remained intact. She had seen battles that these men could never imagine. She stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the doorframe for support. She had faced far worse than words, but this was something different. It wasn't just an attack on her, it was an attack on everything she stood for. The years of service, the sacrifices, the honor. As she opened the door, the biker took a step back, expecting to see fear in her eyes, but instead, Edith's voice was calm, yet firm. "You don't know me, boy. You don't know what I've seen." Her words were simple, but there was an undeniable strength in them, one that seemed to make the biker hesitate for just a moment. But the moment didn't last long. A few more bikers joined in, laughing and taunting her. The sounds of their mockery echoed down the street, and Edith could feel her patience wearing thin. She had fought in wars, seen friends fall, and had survived things most people couldn't even dream of. But this bullying was something she didn't know how to fight. Not yet. And then, in the midst of this storm, Edith had an idea. A thought so simple, yet so powerful that it sent a chill down her spine. She turned and slowly walked back into her house, her fingers brushing the buttons of the old rotary phone on her kitchen counter. The bikers continued to jeer, unaware of what was coming. Edith dialed the number, her hand steady despite the noise outside. The phone rang twice, and then a voice on the other end answered. "Hello?" Edith's voice was barely above a whisper. "I need your help." The conversation that followed was brief, but it was all Edith needed. She knew that within hours, everything would change. The bikers outside didn't know it yet, but they had just made a grave mistake. Edith wasn't just an old woman sitting alone in her house. She wasn't just someone to mock. She had a connection, a power, a history that would make them regret their actions. And as the minutes ticked by, Edith sat back in her chair, waiting for the storm she had unleashed to unfold. The bikers, still laughing, didn't see it coming, but Edith did. Subscribe now for more shocking stories of courage and strength. As the sun climbed higher, casting a golden light over the town, Edith sat quietly in her armchair, her eyes never leaving the window. The sound of the bikers' laughter still echoed in her mind, but she knew better than to let fear or doubt take hold. She had already faced too much in her life, and this was just another test, one she was ready to face head-on. Outside, the bikers were beginning to lose interest in tormenting her, convinced that they had broken her spirit. One of them, a young man with a leather vest and a bandana covering his hair, started pacing in front of the porch. His loud voice carried over to Edith's house. "Man, this is so boring. Let's just go grab a drink or something. This old lady ain't worth our time." The others, tired of the game, agreed. But as they began to walk toward their bikes, something strange happened. A distant rumble of thunder echoed from the horizon, though the sky was clear. It wasn't the storm they'd been expecting. No, this was something far more powerful, something the bikers weren't prepared for. The sound grew louder, and the bikers turned, startled. A dark car, sleek and black, came into view, its headlights cutting through the morning haze. It wasn't the kind of car anyone expected to see in a sleepy town like theirs. This wasn't just any car, it was an intimidating, military-grade vehicle with tinted windows and an aura that made the bikers stop in their tracks. The car came to a slow stop right in front of Edith's house. The bikers exchanged confused glances as the door opened. A tall man in a suit stepped out, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses. He didn't look like someone from their neighborhood, not at all. The tension in the air shifted as the man approached Edith's porch. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. The bikers, who had once been so bold, now seemed unsure of themselves. The young man with the bandana spoke first, his voice shaky. "We were just messing around with the old lady. No harm done." Edith, sitting in her chair, watched with quiet amusement. She had known this moment was coming. This was the reason she made the call. She hadn't expected just any help. She had called the one person who would not only deal with the bikers but send a message that would echo through the town for years to come. The man in the suit nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I see." He turned his attention to Edith, offering her a respectful nod. "Are you all right, Mrs. Harper?" Edith didn't need to answer. The power in her eyes, the weight of her years, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any words ever could. The bikers, now realizing they were in the presence of something far bigger than they anticipated, shifted uncomfortably. The man in the suit looked back at them. "You've made a grave mistake today," he said, his voice dropping lower, filled with an icy calmness. "Do you know who she is?" The young man with the bandana shook his head, confused. "This is Edith Harper," the man continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of respect. "A war hero, a veteran who served this country with honor. You don't get to treat her like this." His gaze shifted from the bikers to the black car that had parked behind him. The doors opened and several other well-dressed individuals emerged, walking towards the group with deliberate purpose. The bikers took a step back, their bravado completely evaporating. One of them, the burly man who had mocked Edith earlier, mumbled under his breath, "We didn't know." "No, you didn't," the man in the suit interrupted. "And now you do. You'll leave, and you'll never come near her again. If you value your reputation, your bikes, and your freedom, you'll remember this moment." The silence that followed was heavy. The bikers, realizing they were completely out of their league, climbed onto their motorcycles one by one. The rumble of the engines that had once sounded so menacing now seemed small, pathetic even, as they revved their bikes and sped away, disappearing down the road. As the last motorcycle disappeared from sight, the man in the suit turned to Edith. "It's over, Mrs. Harper. You're safe now." Edith looked up at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, but I think I've got it from here." The man nodded and gave a respectful bow before returning to his car, his team following behind. Edith sat still for a moment, allowing the quiet to settle around her once again. It was over. The bullies were gone, and the power of her past had spoken louder than their petty threats ever could. But what the bikers didn't know, what none of them could have possibly understood, was that Edith's victory wasn't just about sending them away. It was about showing them and everyone else that no matter how old she was, no matter how small her house or quiet her life, she would always be a force to be reckoned with, and anyone who underestimated her would soon learn how wrong they were. Edith let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the morning lift off her shoulders. But there was still something she had to do. She turned her gaze back to the window, her fingers gently tracing the edges of her military jacket. The phone call had been the first step in a larger mission. This town, this country, needed to remember the sacrifices made by people like her, and Edith Harper wasn't done yet. The storm had passed, but there were still waves to make. Edith sat back in her chair, still feeling the adrenaline pumping through her veins. The bikers were gone, but the aftermath of their visit lingered in the air. The silence in her home was almost unnerving. It felt too calm, too quiet after the storm. She glanced at the phone, the one she had used to make the call that had saved her from what could have been a terrible ordeal. Her fingers hovered over it once more, as if something inside her was telling her she wasn't done yet. Her mind raced through memories of her youth, memories from the war, memories of times when she had faced far greater challenges than this. But this time it was different. The world had changed, and she had changed with it. She wasn't the same woman who had once walked onto battlefields proud and strong. Now she was a 90-year-old veteran with stories to tell, a legacy to uphold. The phone buzzed. Edith quickly picked it up, her heart skipping a beat. It was the number she recognized, the one she had called earlier. She didn't hesitate. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but betraying a hint of the uncertainty she felt inside. "Mrs. Harper," came the voice on the other end. It was the man in the suit. "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're all right. The bikers won't be coming back." "I've made sure of that." Edith nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I'm fine, thanks to you." The man's voice softened. "I just want to make sure you understand you're more than just a war hero. Your courage means something far greater than you realize. People like you have kept this country safe, but now, it's time for us to keep you safe. You've done your part." Edith's heart swelled. She didn't need anyone to remind her of her service, but hearing it from someone who truly understood felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders. She had always known she had a duty to her country, but after all these years it seemed her duty had shifted. She had become a protector in her own right, and that made all the difference. "I'm not done yet," Edith said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I've got more to give." The man on the other end didn't respond immediately. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "I think you'll find that there's a lot more at play here than just the bikers. The people who attacked you, those are the ones we need to worry about. They're part of a bigger network. And if they think they can push people like you around, then they're in for a rude awakening." A chill ran down Edith's spine. She wasn't sure what to make of his words, but one thing was certain: the story wasn't over yet. The bikers weren't just a random threat. They were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And Edith, the quiet veteran, was going to get to the bottom of it. "Thank you for the warning," she said, her mind already working through the possibilities. "I'll be ready." The call ended, and Edith sat there, staring at the phone in her hand. What had started as a simple act of self-defense had now turned into something much larger. The storm was no longer just a passing moment, it had become a warning. She stood up slowly, walking over to the window again. The world outside looked so peaceful, so unchanged. But Edith knew better. The calm before the storm was always the most dangerous. As she gazed out, she saw a car pull into her driveway this time, a familiar face behind the wheel. It was her nephew, Ben, a young man she had always been proud of. He had grown up in this small town, and although he had moved to the city for a job, he made it a point to visit her whenever he could. Ben stepped out of the car, waving at Edith as he approached. He was always a source of comfort for her. With his dark hair and easy smile, he had a way of making everything feel a little lighter, even when the world seemed heavy. "Hey, Aunt Edith," Ben greeted her with a grin. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Ben," Edith replied, her tone softening. "Just a little shaken, but I'll be all right." Ben frowned, clearly concerned. "What happened?" "I heard some bikers were bothering you earlier today." Edith didn't want to go into the details. She didn't want to burden him with the weight of the situation. "It's nothing, really," she said, forcing a smile. "I handled it." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Handled it? You mean you didn't just scare them off with your 'don't mess with me' look?" Edith chuckled softly, but there was an edge to her laugh. "Not exactly. I had a little help." Ben's expression shifted to one of curiosity. "Help? From who?" Edith took a deep breath. "I'll tell you when the time's right." But Ben wasn't convinced. "Aunt Edith, you don't have to keep secrets from me. You know I've got your back, right?" She smiled at him, her heart warming. "I know, Ben. But this isn't just something I want to talk about right now. It's bigger than what you think." Ben didn't press further, but Edith could see the worry in his eyes. He wasn't stupid. He knew something wasn't right. But that was the thing about Ben, he never asked too many questions unless it was important. As Ben settled in on the couch beside her, Edith couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had lived through wars, loss, and hardship, but now, in her twilight years, she was still standing strong. And she wasn't going to let anyone, not even a gang of bikers, tear her down. The storm was far from over, and Edith had just begun to fight. Edith spent the rest of the evening in a restless haze, her mind buzzing with thoughts she couldn't quite make sense of. She'd lived a long life full of experiences, both good and bad, but this was different. The bikers weren't just some random act of harassment. Something more was going on, and she was now a part of it whether she liked it or not. As she lay in bed, the silence of the house felt oppressive, almost suffocating. Her thoughts turned to the man who had called her earlier. What had he meant by a bigger network? Who were these people? And why had they chosen her? She had faced down many enemies in her lifetime, but this was something new. The next morning, Edith woke up early, as was her routine. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, and the world outside her window was still dark. She didn't have time to waste. The man had been clear she was in danger, and she needed to be ready. Ready for what, she wasn't sure. But she wasn't about to sit around waiting for something bad to happen. She made herself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and set it down on the table. Her mind raced as she considered her options. She could call the police, but she didn't trust them to handle this situation, not in the way it needed to be handled. She had spent too many years in the military, too many years seeing the system fail people like her. If something serious was going on, she couldn't rely on others to fix it. It was up to her. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Edith stiffened, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and after the events of the previous day, she wasn't exactly eager to open the door to strangers. She walked cautiously toward the door, checking through the peephole. To her surprise, it wasn't someone she didn't know. It was Ben. "Morning, Aunt Edith," he greeted her with his usual smile. But there was something different in his eyes. The concern was still there, but now it was tinged with suspicion. "What is it, Ben?" Edith asked, not bothering with pleasantries. She had grown used to his visits, but today, her nerves were on edge. "I did some digging last night," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I called around, asked some people I know, and I found something." Edith's heart sank. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but she let him continue. "The bikers, they're part of a local gang, a dangerous one," Ben said, his voice low. "They've been involved in all kinds of illegal activity. Drug trafficking, extortion, the whole deal. And it looks like they've set their sights on you." Edith's mind raced. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. "Why me?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief. What could they possibly want with a 90-year-old woman? Ben's eyes were filled with worry. "I don't know. But it doesn't matter. What matters now is that you're in danger. We need to do something before it's too late." Edith took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She couldn't let fear take over. She had faced down much worse in her time. This was just another challenge to overcome. "I'm not scared of them, Ben," she said firmly. "But I do need to know what I'm up against." Ben nodded. "I'll keep digging. But you need to be careful. They won't stop until they get what they want." As he left, Edith stood in the doorway, watching him drive off. A sense of dread lingered in her chest, but she wasn't about to let it paralyze her. The world may have changed, but she hadn't lost her edge. If anything, this situation was about to get personal. She picked up the phone once again, her fingers hovering over the numbers. She knew who to call. The man who had helped her before. He had promised her that there was more at play than just a group of bikers. Now, Edith was ready to find out exactly what that meant. Dialing the number, she waited as the phone rang. It only took a few seconds for the familiar voice on the other end to answer. "Mrs. Harper," the man's voice was calm and steady. "I trust you're doing well?" "I'm alive, thanks to you," Edith replied. "But things just got a whole lot worse." The man was silent for a moment. "What do you mean?" "The bikers, they're part of something bigger, aren't they?" Edith's voice was sharp now, the urgency creeping into her words. "I need to know everything. I'm not afraid of them, but I need to understand what's going on." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're right. They're just the tip of the iceberg. You've stepped into something far more dangerous than you realize. These people, they don't just target anyone. They've been watching you for a long time." Edith's heart skipped a beat. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't explain everything just yet, but I promise you this, you're not alone in this fight. The network you're dealing with is much larger than anything you've encountered before, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." A cold chill ran down Edith's spine, but there was no turning back now. She had made her choice. She wasn't just going to sit idly by while these criminals threatened her life. She was going to take the fight to them. "I don't need promises," Edith said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "I need action." The man's tone shifted slightly. "You'll get it. But you'll have to be ready for what's coming. This won't be easy, Mrs. Harper. But I know you're up for it." With that, the call ended, and Edith was left standing alone in the silence once again. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for sure: this fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The twists were coming, and she was ready. The following days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next as Edith prepared herself for what was coming. She went through the motions of her daily routine, but her mind was constantly working, analyzing, and strategizing. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. She had been in enough tight situations to know when something was off. Her house, once a sanctuary, now felt more like a prison. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. There were moments when she swore she saw shadows in the corners of her vision, figures moving just outside her line of sight. But every time she turned to look, there was nothing there. The bikers had sent a message, and it wasn't just the harassment anymore. It was personal. They knew where she lived, they knew her routine, and they were getting closer. One evening, as Edith sat on her porch, sipping her tea and listening to the soft rustling of the trees, a black SUV pulled into her driveway. Her heart skipped a beat as the vehicle came to a slow stop in front of her home. She didn't recognize the car, but the sense of dread that settled over her was undeniable. Her instincts screamed that this was no coincidence. The door to the SUV opened, and out stepped a tall man, dressed in dark clothing. He wasn't wearing a helmet, and his face was unmistakable. It was the man from the phone call, the one who had warned her about the bikers. Edith's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't move. She had lived too long to show fear. She watched as he approached her, his steps measured and deliberate. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice low and calm. "We need to talk." Edith stood up slowly, setting her cup down on the table. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone steady but laced with suspicion. The man glanced around, as if checking for any unwanted eyes. "There's no time for pleasantries," he said, his voice urgent. "The bikers are part of a much larger organization. They're not just after you, they're after something you have." Edith's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What could I possibly have that they want? He hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a small envelope from his coat pocket. He handed it to her, and she took it with a steady hand. As she opened it, she saw that it contained a single photograph, an old black and white picture of a group of soldiers. But there was something about the image that made Edith's breath catch. One of the men in the photograph was her late husband, Jack. "I didn't want to believe it at first," the man continued. "But this picture, your husband was more than just a soldier. He was involved in something that connects him to this network." Edith's mind raced. She had known Jack had secrets. She'd always suspected that his past held more than he had ever told her. But this was far beyond anything she could have imagined. "Why is this relevant now?" Edith asked, her voice tight. "He's been dead for years." The man's eyes darkened. "Because the people who want that picture and everything your husband was involved in, they've been looking for it for decades. And now they know you're the key." Edith's stomach churned. "So, they've been after me all this time?" "No," he said, his voice grave. "They just found out." A wave of cold dread washed over her as the implications of his words hit home. This wasn't just about the bikers anymore. This was much bigger, and she was standing right in the middle of it. She had no choice but to face it head-on. The man leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a safe place we can hide you, but we need to act fast. If we don't, they'll come for you. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Edith shook her head, her thoughts racing. She couldn't just run away. She'd spent too much of her life fighting for what was right. She had lived through too many wars, too many battles to back down now. She wasn't about to let a group of criminals dictate her fate. "No," she said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not hiding. I'm not running. If they want me, they'll have to come and get me." The man looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and nodded. "I knew you'd say that. But you have to understand this is bigger than anything you've faced before. These people," he paused, glancing around again, "they will do anything to get what they want." "I've faced worse," Edith replied, her voice steady. "And I'll face whatever comes next." With that, the man gave a small nod and turned to leave. "Then get ready, because it's coming." As the man walked back to the SUV, Edith stood on her porch, staring after him. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Her husband's past had come back to haunt her. And now it was too late to turn back. The bikers were just the beginning. The true battle was about to begin. Edith knew she had to be ready. But there was one thing she didn't know: who could she trust in a world where everything was falling apart? The twists kept coming, and with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. But one thing was certain: Edith Harper wasn't about to go down without a fight. The night stretched on, heavy with anticipation. Edith couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside her window seemed to send a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. But she wasn't going to let fear control her. Not now. Not ever. Her mind was racing with questions. What exactly was her husband involved in? Why had he kept such secrets from her? And who were these people who would go to such extreme lengths to get what they wanted? The photograph the man had given her burned in her hand. She couldn't stop looking at it. There was Jack, smiling, young and full of life, except now, that smile felt like a mask, hiding something much darker. Edith thought back to their time together. The late-night phone calls he would sometimes take in a whisper. The strange trips he'd make without telling her where he was going. At the time, she thought it was just part of the job. But now, with everything that had happened, she began to wonder if she'd ever truly known him. A knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. Her heart leaped in her chest, but she quickly composed herself before standing up. She wasn't expecting anyone. The man from earlier? Or had the bikers finally come for her? She cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught when she saw who was standing on the other side. It was a woman, her face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. There was something about her, an energy that screamed danger. Edith had learned to trust her gut over the years, and it was telling her that this woman wasn't here for a friendly chat. She opened the door slowly, keeping her hand near the knob in case she needed to slam it shut. "Can I help you?" Edith asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman didn't speak at first. Instead, she surveyed Edith with cold, calculating eyes. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "You don't know me, Mrs. Harper, but I know you." Edith stiffened. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm the one who's been trying to protect you, and it's time you understand just how deep this goes." Edith's mind raced. "I've heard enough. I don't need protection." The woman's smile faded, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "It's not about what you want. It's about what's coming for you. Your husband's past, it's catching up with you. The bikers. They're only the beginning." Edith's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The woman glanced around, making sure no one was listening, before she spoke again. "There are others, more dangerous than the bikers. People who will stop at nothing to get what they're after. And your husband? He's been dead for years, but his enemies are very much alive." Edith felt her knees weaken. Her mind was spinning, her world crashing down around her. The woman was right. Her husband's past wasn't just some distant memory, it was a ticking time bomb. And now it was ready to explode. "You're not safe here, Mrs. Harper," the woman continued. "They'll come for you, and when they do, you won't stand a chance unless you're prepared." Edith clenched her fists, anger mixing with fear. She wasn't going to run. Not now, not ever. But she needed answers. She needed to understand why this was happening to her. "What do you want from me?" Edith demanded, her voice firm. The woman's eyes flickered, almost as if she was deciding whether or not to tell her the truth. Finally, she spoke. Your husband didn't just serve in the military. He was part of something much bigger, something secret. And that secret is hidden in a place you'd never think to look. You need to find it before they do. Edith felt a cold chill run down her spine. What secret? What do you mean? The woman took a step back, her gaze intense. It's not just about the picture. It's about power, control. And your husband was the key to it all. The question is, are you willing to risk everything to stop them from getting what they want? Edith stood frozen, her mind spinning with this new, horrifying revelation. She was in over her head, and she knew it. But one thing was certain: she wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. Before she could respond, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Edith watched her go, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know who this woman was, or whether she could trust her, but one thing was clear: her life would never be the same again. The bikers were just the beginning. There were far darker forces at play, and Edith was caught in the middle of it all. But she wasn't backing down. She couldn't. Not when she had the chance to uncover the truth about her husband and stop whatever dangerous game was being played behind the scenes. Her path was unclear, but one thing was certain: Edith Harper was going to fight, and she was going to win. Edith sat down on the couch, her head spinning. The woman's words echoed in her mind, each one heavier than the last. She couldn't deny the truth that was slowly unfolding before her. Her husband's past, his hidden secrets, had been the foundation of everything, every lie, every mystery, every danger she was now facing. But where did it all lead? What was this secret she was supposed to uncover? And why did it have the power to destroy everything? She glanced at the old family photo on the wall, her husband's smiling face staring back at her. He'd been her protector, her partner in everything. She had believed in him, trusted him completely. And now that trust felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Who was he really? The sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside broke her thoughts. She froze, her heart racing as she peeked through the window. A dark figure moved silently across the yard. She couldn't make out their face, but the shape, the posture, it looked like one of the bikers. Her breath caught in her throat. Were they here? Had they come for her? No, she told herself. She had to stay calm. She couldn't panic. Not now. She knew they were looking for answers, but she had no idea what they wanted from her. Whatever it wasn't going to end well if she let them catch her off guard. Edith grabbed the photo of her husband from the wall, staring at it once more. What was it you were hiding, Jack? She whispered to the empty room. There had to be something, some clue she was missing. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like she was stumbling in the dark, trying to piece together a puzzle without the key. Suddenly the phone rang, breaking the silence. Edith jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at the phone, unsure if she should answer. Was it another threat? A warning? Or maybe it was someone who could finally give her the answers she needed? With trembling hands, she picked up the receiver. Hello? A voice, low and raspy, came through the line. Edith, I know you're scared, but you need to listen. There's no time to waste. You have to find the journal. Edith's breath caught in her throat. What journal? Who is this? The voice didn't answer her question directly. It's the key. The one thing that will tie everything together. Your husband's past. The bikers, the people after you. It's all in there. The line went dead before Edith could respond. She was left staring at the phone, her heart racing. The journal. What journal? Was this another trap? Or was this the clue she had been waiting for? She didn't have time to waste. Edith knew that much. The bikers were closing in, and the danger was becoming more real with every passing minute. She had to act, and she had to do it fast. Grabbing her coat, she ran to the garage where Jack used to keep his tools and old paperwork. Maybe the journal was hidden there, just like the woman had said. Maybe this was the answer she'd been looking for all along. As she rummaged through boxes and crates, her mind raced. Who was the mysterious caller? How did they know about the journal? And why had they mentioned the bikers? It all seemed too perfect, too convenient. But she had no choice but to follow the lead. She had to uncover the truth, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Minutes passed, but Edith didn't stop. She couldn't. She sifted through old letters, faded photographs, and dusty boxes of forgotten memories. Then, at the bottom of one of the crates, she found it. A worn leather-bound book, its edges frayed from years of neglect. She felt a chill run down her spine as she pulled it from the box. This had to be it. The journal. Her hand shook as she opened the cover. The pages inside were filled with Jack's handwriting, scrawled in hurried, messy notes. As she flipped through the pages, she felt the weight of the secrets it contained. Codes, names, and places she didn't recognize. But one entry in particular caught her eye. It was a name one that sent a shiver through her body. Dante. The name was written in bold, underlined letters, followed by a string of numbers. Edith's pulse quickened. Dante. The name didn't mean anything to her, but it seemed important, like a key to unlocking everything. She needed to find out who or what Dante was. Suddenly, the sound of a motorcycle revving in the distance cut through the silence, followed by the unmistakable rumble of more bikes. Edith's heart skipped a beat. They were here. She grabbed the journal and rushed inside, locking the door behind her. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear: she had to find Dante. He was the key to everything, and she didn't have much time. With the bikers getting closer, Edith knew that her only chance for survival was to follow the trail Jack had left behind. She wasn't going down without a fight. Edith clutched the journal tightly to her chest as the sound of the motorcycles grew louder, their engines cutting through the quiet night like a pack of wolves closing in. She could hear their voices, muffled and distant, but she knew they were getting closer. Her mind raced. The journal had to lead her to Dante, and Dante had to be the answer. But where could she find him? And what would he want with her? She couldn't think about that now. She had to act. Fast. Edith rushed to the back door, glancing one last time at the window to make sure she hadn't been seen. She pushed the door open, cringing as it creaked on its hinges. She didn't have much time. The road leading into town was just beyond the woods, and if she could get there before the bikers did, maybe, just maybe, she could find the answers she needed. But as she stepped out into the night, her heart sank. The yard was empty. The shadows cast by the dim porch light made it hard to see, but she could hear the engines roaring closer. They were near. She could feel it. "Think, Edith. Think," she muttered to herself, forcing herself to stay calm. There was a small shed at the edge of the property, hidden by a thicket of trees. It wasn't much, but it was the only place she could think of to hide for now. She darted toward it, praying the bikers wouldn't spot her in the darkness. The sound of their motorcycles was now deafening, vibrating the ground beneath her feet as they tore through the woods toward her house. She reached the shed and threw open the door, slipping inside just as the first of the bikers came into view. They were right there, close enough for her to hear their heavy boots hitting the dirt, their laughter echoing through the air. Edith held her breath, crouching low in the shed, praying they wouldn't see her. For a moment, all she could hear was the wind rustling through the trees and her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. The bikers' voices grew louder, but then they stopped. She didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. She wasn't sure if they had found her, or if they were simply waiting for something. And then, out of nowhere, a voice broke the silence. "I know you're in there, Edith." It was the same low, raspy voice from the phone call earlier. Her heart skipped a beat. How did they know? She hadn't made a sound. "I don't know who you are," Edith whispered, her voice trembling. "But you need to leave me alone." The voice chuckled darkly. "Leave you alone? I think you know that's not possible anymore. You're in this deeper than you think." Edith's hand shook as she gripped the journal, her fingers digging into the worn leather. She could feel her nerves unraveling. Who was this person? What did they want from her? And how did they know so much? "Tell me where Dante is," the voice demanded, "and maybe we'll let you walk away from this." Dante. The name rang in Edith's ears. She had no idea who he was, but everything pointed to him being the key to the nightmare she was now trapped in. I don't know where he is," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please just leave me alone." There was a long pause, and then the voice spoke again, softer this time. You really don't know, do you? Edith's heart hammered in her chest. I don't. I swear. I don't know anything. Another pause, and then the voice sighed. Maybe it's time we show you. You can't hide from the truth forever. Before she could react, the door to the shed creaked open. Edith froze, her breath caught in her throat. In the dim light, she saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a menacing presence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Edith, he said, his voice steady, yet laced with something darker. We've been looking for you. The man stepped forward, and she could make out the details of his face, sharp features, cold eyes, and a scar running down his cheek. He wasn't one of the bikers, but he was just as dangerous. What do you want from me? Edith demanded, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. The man smirked. I think you know exactly what we want. The journal, Edith. Give it to me. Her grip on the journal tightened. I don't have it, she lied, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her insides. It's not here. The man's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer. Don't lie to me. We know you have it. Just as he lunged for her, Edith acted on instinct. She swung the journal at him, hitting him across the face with all the force she could muster. The man staggered back, cursing, but he didn't fall. He only looked more furious, more determined to get what he wanted. You'll regret that, he growled. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Edith turned and ran, her legs burning as she sprinted out of the shed and into the night. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay there. The bikers, the man in the shed, everything was closing in on her. She had no choice but to keep moving. She heard the man's voice shouting behind her, but she didn't look back. There was no time. She needed to find Dante, and she needed to find him fast. The journal was her only lead, and she couldn't afford to lose it now. As she ran through the woods, the trees blurring past her, Edith's mind raced. Who was Dante? Why was everyone so desperate to find him? And why did she feel like she was being dragged into something much bigger than she could handle? The answers were out there, but with every step she could feel the walls closing in. Time was running out. Edith's breath came in sharp gasps as she darted through the trees, the crunch of dead leaves beneath her feet the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. She didn't dare look back. She knew they were following her, the bikers, the man, all of them. But the darkness seemed to swallow up everything behind her, leaving her with no choice but to move forward, deeper into the woods. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, sent a chill down her spine. She had no plan, no escape route. Just a journal full of cryptic clues, a name she barely knew, and a desperation she couldn't shake. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding as she tried to piece together the puzzle. Dante, the journal, the bikers. What was it all leading to? Why was she suddenly the center of all this chaos? She had always been a quiet woman, living a peaceful life in her small house by the woods. She had never asked for this. Her eyes flicked to the journal she still gripped tightly in her hands. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age, yet it pulsed with a strange energy that she couldn't explain. She had found it tucked away in a dusty box, buried deep in the attic. It wasn't just any journal, it was something that belonged to someone else, someone who had been caught up in a web of danger just like she was now. The more she flipped through its pages, the more she found strange symbols, cryptic messages, and references to Dante, a name that appeared over and over again, as if it were some kind of key. But who was Dante? Edith stumbled over a tree root, her foot catching as she fell to the ground. She quickly pushed herself back to her feet, barely noticing the scrape on her knee. She was exhausted, but she couldn't stop. Not now. The sound of the motorcycles revving in the distance pulled her out of her thoughts. They were closing in on her. They couldn't be far now. Suddenly she heard something that froze her in place. A voice, low and familiar. You're running out of time, Edith. She whipped around, heart pounding in her chest. The man with the scar was standing just a few feet away, blocking her path. His cold eyes glinted in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. I told you this wasn't over, he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. Give me the journal. You don't know what you're dealing with. Edith took a step back, her pulse quickening. The man was right, she didn't know what she was dealing with. But she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. Who are you? She demanded, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound strong. And what do you want with me? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm someone who's been looking for the journal, he said. And you've got it. That's all that matters. No, Edith snapped, her voice hardening. You don't get it. I don't know what this is about, but I'm not giving you the journal. He smiled, though it wasn't a smile that reassured her. It was the smile of a predator, one who knew he had the upper hand. You don't have a choice, he said quietly, before suddenly lunging toward her. Edith barely had time to react. She sidestepped just in time, feeling the man's hand graze her arm. She stumbled again, but this time, her instincts kicked in. She shoved the journal into her jacket pocket and darted to the side, running in the opposite direction. The man cursed under his breath as he chased after her, but she was faster this time. Her heart pounded in her chest, her legs burning as she sprinted through the forest. She couldn't afford to slow down. She had to keep moving. She heard the roar of the motorcycles again, now closer than ever, and she realized with a sickening lurch that they were coming straight for her. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to go. Edith's mind raced as she searched for some kind of escape. And then, just as she thought she couldn't run any longer, she saw the faint glow of lights up ahead. The road. The town was near. She could make it. She pushed herself harder, sprinting toward the light, knowing that the bikers and the man were closing in. She had to get to the town, to safety. But as she got closer, she saw something that stopped her dead in her tracks. A figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking her path. It was him. Dante. The man she had been searching for. The one who held the answers. His silhouette was tall, his posture rigid, and his face was calm, unreadable. But his eyes were full of something Edith couldn't quite place. Fear? Anger? Hope? It was hard to tell. You shouldn't have come here, he said, his voice calm, but heavy with something Edith couldn't explain. Edith stopped just a few feet away from him, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Who are you? She asked again, her voice barely more than a whisper. Why are you here? Dante's gaze flicked to the journal she had hidden in her pocket, then back to her. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Because you're in the middle of something much bigger than you realize, he said. And if you want to survive this, you need to trust me. Edith looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't understand it all, didn't understand him, but one thing was certain. Dante was the key. And if she was going to get out of this alive, she had to trust him. Edith stood frozen, staring at Dante, her heart still pounding from the chase. The man with the scar was getting closer, his heavy footsteps echoing through the trees. The bikers were now nearly on top of her. She could hear their engines roaring in the distance, the sound of death closing in. Dante's eyes held hers, unblinking and tense. There was a moment of silence between them, a moment where time seemed to stretch. And then, with a quick movement, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Edith's breath catch in her throat. It was a phone. Not just any phone, a burner phone. He looked at it for a moment, almost as if he were considering something. Then, with deliberate calm, he handed it to her. Call them, he said, his voice steady. This is your only chance. Edith glanced at the phone, confusion swirling in her mind. Call who? The people who are behind this, Dante explained. They're the only ones who can help you now. Edith's fingers trembled as she took the phone from his hand, the weight of the situation settling on her like a heavy cloak. She knew who Dante was talking about, the secret group mentioned in the journal. The same group that had been connected to the bikers, the man with the scar, and everything that had led her to this moment. With a deep breath, she punched in the number on the screen, the phone buzzing in her hand. As the call connected, her mind raced, the fear and the adrenaline from the chase still fresh in her veins. Who would pick up? What would they say? The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. It was a calm, steady voice, one that sounded almost distant, as though it came from somewhere far away. "We've been waiting for you, Edith," the voice said, and just hearing those words sent a shiver down her spine. "You've done well to make it this far. But now, the real test begins." What do you mean?" Edith stammered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The man with the scar was nearly upon them. She didn't have much time. "We've been watching you for a long time," the voice continued. "You've been chosen for something bigger. You hold the key to the future, Edith. But first, you need to survive." The line went dead before she could ask any more questions. She stared at the phone, her heart racing. The silence felt deafening, the weight of the words echoing in her ears. The call had been a warning, but what did it mean? Suddenly, the man with the scar lunged at her, but Dante was faster. He moved with the precision of a trained fighter, grabbing the man by the wrist and twisting it with such force that the man cried out in pain. With one swift motion, Dante shoved him back, sending him sprawling to the ground. The bikers pulled up behind them, their engines screeching to a halt, but Dante didn't hesitate. "Get to the car," he shouted at Edith, his voice harsh, commanding. Edith didn't need to be told twice. She turned and ran, her legs screaming in protest, but the adrenaline was all she needed to push her forward. As she neared the road, she saw the headlights of a car approaching a sleek black vehicle that slid to a stop beside her. The door swung open, and inside sat a woman, cold, calculating, but somehow familiar. "Get in now," the woman snapped. Edith didn't hesitate. She jumped into the car, slamming the door behind her as the car sped off, leaving the chaos of the woods behind. The man with the scar and the bikers were nothing more than distant figures now, fading into the night. As they drove through the winding roads, Edith's mind was a whirlwind of questions. What had just happened? Who were these people? And what was the truth behind the journal? The woman didn't speak until they reached a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The car came to a halt, and the woman turned to face Edith. "You've made it this far, but the real journey is just beginning," she said cryptically. "We've been waiting for someone like you. Someone strong enough to handle the truth." Edith stared at her, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. The weight of it all was almost too much to bear. But one thing was clear: her life would never be the same. The woman handed her a file thick, heavy, filled with documents that Edith couldn't begin to understand. "You're part of something much bigger now," the woman said. "There's no turning back." As Edith took the file from her hands, she realized that the world she thought she knew, the world of quiet towns, peaceful lives, and ordinary days, had been a lie. The truth was far more complex, far more dangerous, and she was right in the middle of it. With a shaky breath, Edith opened the file, and as she read the first line of what was to come, she understood. The real fight was only just beginning, and this time, there would be no running.